Welcome to the Future Food, New Tech to Save the World. It is wonderful to see you all here. I am Chengyi, a professor here at INSEAD. I'll introduce myself a little bit, but today it is really a great opportunity for us to have a dialogue around where is the food industry now, what has happened in the past, where are we going in the future, and more importantly, how can new technology help us rethink and reimagine the future of food? For us to do that, we are very happy to have the three panelists with me who are actually doing this very actively in the field. I will let them introduce themselves in a minute, but here just very briefly for you, we have Carrie today. We have Carrie from Avant Meat. We have Jagannathan from Tech Camellia. We have Tim from INSEAD. And I wanted to note that this is part of our global theory around Tech Talk X, which is in partnership with Accenture, where we discuss where the different technologies apply in different businesses and how can we take it into the future. Before we get started, we wanted to hear a little bit from you. So Sandra is going to help me launch a poll from all of you. Basically 3 questions. If you can kindly answer them, that would be wonderful. So the first one, we wanted to ask you a little bit around what are some of the challenges facing the food industry. If you were to pick a few of the top ones, which ones would be? And then we ask you who should be responsible for some of the challenges that's happening around us. And if we move forward, who should actually take lead in solving some of those challenges? So let's give you a couple minutes and answer those 3 questions. Let's take a quick look. This looks quite interesting. Again, we give you a lot of options, but they broadly fall into about 4 categories: around climate change, around environmental challenges, around food distribution and access inequality, and around waste and how do you treat waste and pollution, and how do you think about societal issues around health. So it seems the majority is focusing around the carbon emission, global warming, and around depletion of natural resources. And there's a lot around food waste and pollution as well. This is wonderful, right? So the top few are actually the key topics we're going to touch upon today. As we know, many of the food challenges, not only the production side, but how is the distribution unequal across the different parts of the world? And how does that lead to additional waste, additional contribution to the global carbon emission and global warming and the continuous depletion of natural resources. Sandra, if you go to, right, so the second question we ask you, who should be the most responsible for these questions, and how can we actually think about solving it? It's actually a little bit more distributed if you kind of scroll down and look at the result itself. The large food manufacturing probably counts the most, and following that is agriculture companies. But between the two, you see a significant share, close to 50%. So we do feel there's a lot of the incumbent advantage that's been taken care of, but how can they contribute back to really solve these key challenges? Very interestingly, what we also see is around the consumers. We also see this big challenge. Where often discussed by the business incumbent is, although consumers by and large wanted to have more organic, sustainable, and responsible food, however, when it comes to price, especially now we're facing a global economic situation and inflation, and things become a little bit challenging. So how do we actually collectively come together as a society to solve this will continue to become a challenge. And the last one we're saying, what are the main blockers, right, for some of the meaningful actions? And many of you also highlight the challenge from large producers, consumer brands, agriculture companies. So we will also ask our panelists today a little bit, how do we think about this, and how do we collectively move forward? And importantly, what's the role of startup and innovation? What's the role of technology? Great. So as I mentioned, this is very interesting to hear your perspective, and we'll continue to pull in the questions from you to ask the panelists. But let me take about 3 to 5 minutes, try to frame up a little bit of the question we highlighted in the poll. So why are we talking about the food industry, and why there are many conversations around reimagining the industry? Partly because we have been developing as a human society, both on the production side and on the consumption side. Many of you are aware of the statistics. If you look at global GDP growth, if you look at the overall life expectancy and the quality of life for human beings, it really we have leapfrogged and grown significantly, especially in the past few decades or a couple hundred years. At the same time, what we basically see the productivity gain as well as a result of the innovation and technology. So this is productivity per hour globally. And a lot, if you actually follow the time series, you're also seeing a huge increase across different parts of the world, especially in developing countries. So these are all really great news. But why should we really think about our industries differently? Because many of the times, as all this growth occur, we also seen a bit of a challenge that's happening around. So this is the growth in agriculture output. As we've seen, a lot of the different industries, different countries has grown significantly. And the growth in not only the production side, but also the consumption side also grow worldwide by many different organizations' calculation. Along with that, I was saying, the growth also leads to many different other factors. So this is a very complex chart. I won't have time to go into details, but these are mainly caused by part of the externalities. So to highlight a few of the factors here, the depletion of natural resource is what we know as the commons dilemma, right? So a lot of the natural resources like water, like air, we're basically taking the consumption of it with the notion that it will last forever. And partly it's also the way we're producing our food, right? The land use, the production. So you see here the land use and production of pesticides leads to increasing pollution and deforestation. And partly of that is when we view, right? So the third factor is when we view Earth or the planet, we often view it as a very robust buffering system. That means a lot of what we put in, like carbon dioxide, like other pollutants, the nature will kind of resolve it. And we also view it as a regenerative system. So both are true. However, if you study biochemistry or biology or chemistry, you would know any buffering system or regenerative system has a timeline and has a buffering zone. And many of the cases, we might actually be pushing out of that buffering zone, so the system have a hard time regenerating itself. So that's what you see on the right-hand side of the slide, when a lot of these carbon emission and the greenhouse house gases leads to a climate change, the rising in temperature, and that further, right, have a lot of externalities that were not folded into the industrial conversation. For example, the reduction in biodiversity. Some of these are direct. For example, our agriculture field is really selecting for the species that are benefiting human society in terms of against pests, for example, have a higher production. But at the same time, that significantly reduces the biodiversity in the natural field, and then that causes a lot of challenges when you have a single or few species that are vulnerable, like altogether, to certain new disease variants. So we're going to show a few of this data in a few minutes, but what we put together, right, is as we're increasing production of food, as we increase the consumption of food, we have been neglecting the externalities, the commons dilemma. How do we treat nature as a regenerative and buffering system? And how do we think about the extended effect from the actions that we take? So just to give you a flavor to highlight some of the things that you voted on, and then some of the things our panelists will be touching upon in a few minutes. Number one, the impact around global warming. I would ask you to just take a couple minutes of silence. I really wanted to take this over time, right? So this is a video basically tallying the global temperature from the 1800s to 1880s to today. I'm going to play the video without any sound, and what we can basically try to take in is how much, right, the human activity, especially in the recent years, has changed the global climate. As you can see, especially in the past 50 years or so, right, the significant increase in the sort of overall global temperature as a result of the human impact is undeniable. And that data has been shown sort of by multiple sources, both on the climate science and other scientific field. If you actually look into the detail, agriculture and food production contributes hugely to the global greenhouse gas emission. And interestingly, for us to think about, it's not only a one-way direct of impact, but also the global climate change also challenges the agricultural productivity. So on the right-hand side, what you basically see is the negative impact due to the climate change on majority of the countries. There are only 5 countries in the world benefited from this change of the climate. And that partly, as I mentioned, in addition to the greenhouse emission and carbon emission, also partly due to the deforestation. So this is the data to show the deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. And then there are basically large forest systems that not only control the local climate, but also control the global climate, both around carbon and also around water cycle. So any impact around those climate systems have a huge global impact on how we live and what the planet looks like. We do see a recovery in the recent years, both around land use and around deforestation. But at the same time, this trend continues, right? Despite of the recent recovery in a little bit of the field, and as the production grows globally, we continue to see the challenge around deforestation and land use. As I mentioned, deforestation not only have a local impact and global impact on climate, but also around the water cycle. So there's another data to show the natural resource depletion around water scarcity around the world, and also the water scarcity around water over time. Increasingly, as the population grows and production grow, we see a depletion of water. And partly as we talk about the biodiversity loss is also very significant across different species around the world. Most impacting us recently, what you see is the reduction of biodiversity, for example, for bananas. They are very vulnerable to the emerging diseases. This is the tropical race 4, which could impact the global banana production in the next few years. Part of this is also around how do we farm and how do we produce our food. Part of the panelists we're going to talk about today is around fish. The overfishing has really reduced significantly, not only the fish species we desire, but also other different species and then smaller sized fishes, because we use the desirable size for food consumption, and the rest we kind of grind them up for animal feed as well. And all of these also leads to many of the things that we see in the news. For example, the season 2020 to 23rd of Alaskan king crab harvest is canceled, and that also has an impact on the snow crab. There been estimated about 1 billion loss of this global species, partly due to the overfishing and partly due to climate change. The exact reason is still to be uncovered, but you can see the significant impact of human activities. Another big interesting thing is as we increase the production, because the food distribution is uneven along the globe, therefore we also incur a lot of food waste. That not only is unhelpful when we start thinking about a global food shortage, but it also creates a lot of waste in terms of landfill, in terms of carbon emission. So with that, what we really wanted to pay attention to this global impact, but also what's the role of technology in solving some of these problems. So with that, let me turn off the slides and go back to our panelists to introduce them and their business. So if I can ask our panelists to turn on their cameras, what we're going to do is we'll first introduce Carrie Chan, who is the co-founder and CEO of Avant Meat. So maybe tell us a little bit about what you do with your business and why it's an important challenge to tackle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Nice to meet you all. Carrie here, co-founder and CEO of Avant. We are the first cultivated fish company of Asia. What we do is to develop a biotech platform that we can use the cell, the nature of cells, that they, the stemness, and also the ability to actually proliferate outside of animal bodies to produce food. So the bottom line is that we can, starting with some starter cells that we grow, we call that cell line, and then no longer we need to rely on killing and catching and slaughtering fish for our product. And then all of the process will happen in a very close and a sterilized system, similar to how we are making beer and yogurt. We have the whole process taking place inside a bioreactor to keep the right the right pH and temperature, etc., so that we can produce a food. The objective why we do that is that the technology can actually work on different kind of meat product like chicken, pork, and beef. The underlying scientific principle are very applicable across different animal species. However, we chose to work on fish in particular for the Asian market because we consume over 60 to 70% of the global produce of seafood actually in Asia. So it's a lot of demand and also a lot of environmental impact. The benefit for consumers are also including, we now know that a lot of pollutants in the ocean, heavy metals, microplastic, etc. So using a new method, we can actually produce something that we believe that will provide options that consumer will have better peace of mind when they consume seafood. And so we also see that it's as a technology that we can work with businesses as an alternative production way to produce animal proteins, because as what Professor just mentioned here, climate change also affecting the livelihood and the business operation of fishery, as well as to a certain extent also aquaculture. So this is what we do. We have a laboratory in both Hong Kong and Singapore, and now doing our scale up and starting our pilot production.
Excellent. So we do see a lot of the new technology coming in, so we can reduce the land use and also reduce the direct impact around natural resources to produce our food differently. So thank you very much, Carrie. We'll come back to you for a few questions. Let's continue with Jagannathan from Tech Camellia. What do you do in India, and how do you help the farmers?
Hello to everyone around the world. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jagannathan. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Tech Camellia. I'm speaking to you from Bangalore in India today. When Durlav and myself co-founded Tech Camellia in 2019, we realized that very few farmers and agribusinesses had real-time information about their own farms, things like the soil health or the irrigation status. They ended up irrigating at the wrong place and also losing their whole yield, overspraying the chemicals at times, etc., etc. They were really losing out. This is the pain point that Tech Camellia has been solving for the last 2 to 3 years. So we bring the most up-to-date real-time information on soil, on the irrigation systems directly to the farmer's fingertips. So how do we do this? Very briefly, we position certain sensors in the ground, which are a lot more expensive, but we also rely a lot on satellites. And then we use cloud systems, which have become really, really sophisticated. And we deliver this in a very simple way without much technical jargon to our core customers, which is the farmers. More recently, in 2021 or 22, part of our system, and I stress this aspect, also part of our system use machine learning code to do some self-learning and improve these insights for our farmers. More than technology, I want to stress here, it's our deep and core understanding of the farmer, his or her growing cycle on the field, and also the business model, which comes together to help us now scale up to some of the largest commodity growers and traders around the world, also the small farmers. Also helped us attract seed funds from Loyal VC, which is backing around 200 startups globally. So as our technology has matured, we are happy to report most of the farmers and businesses report that they've reduced the use of chemicals in their field. And why do they do that? Again, because of the precise inputs and data that I just mentioned. So as a result, Tech Camellia, we also have this theme now towards not just the farmer, but the end consumer, which is, around the world, who buy some of these commodities around in the supermarkets. We are also now impacting some of the SDGs or these UN goals, especially clean river systems and clean water systems, which is really good. To summarize, we make money by giving the most up-to-date data to the farmer. In the process, we are creating these cleaner food cycles and ecosystem in the communities. Just a few lines about myself, an MBA from INSEAD 14J. Also, I was involved in satellite imaging and data systems in my corporate career with Shell and BP for around 12 years. I thank Chengyi and the panel giving me this opportunity and look forward to learning from the audience, the global audience here as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jagannathan. We'll come back to you once again around technology. Recently, we do see a huge development around AI and around mobile technologies, and that has been benefiting a lot of the farming communities in various ways through information, through giving seed fund or sort of peer-to-peer lending. The interesting thing always with digital is how do you leverage digital to reduce this inequality instead of deepening it. So we'll come back to you and basically how do you bring this technology to folks in India, in that community. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to Tim, also INSEAD alumni. Actually, all three panelists are INSEAD alumni, and say a few words about yourself and INSEAD.
Yeah, thanks, and happy to speak to you all. My name is Tim. I'm in a 19J MBA, I think the most junior MBA of the three of us on the panel today. So I am a 19J MBA. Today, I am the CEO and co-founder of a Singapore-based insect startup called INSEAD. We originally kind of created our idea during the INSEAD program, but today we're an independent business that is around 1.5 years, 2 years old, operating out of Singapore. We produce insect ingredients such as insect protein, insect oil, and insect fertilizer, all from our facilities today in Singapore. So really, why is it that we're doing what we are doing? We realize that it takes a lot of wild fish. You showed some slides earlier, right? But it takes a lot of wild fish to, and actually almost half of all the wild fish caught globally is not going to human consumption, but it's actually used to feed other fish. So if you eat a salmon today, it can actually mean that it takes 2 kilograms. You actually need to have 2 kilograms of wild fish to grow just 1 kilogram of salmon or shrimp. And feeding fish to fish to us really seems ridiculous. So we are feeding insects to fish. Of course, it's much more sustainable. So what is it really that we do? We take palm oil waste. So there's a waste all the way through into landfill. We feed it into our facilities and our insects eat it. And then the insects grow and we process the insects into 3 products. As I mentioned, a protein that we use as an ingredient in aquaculture feed, for example, shrimp feed and fish feed. We produce oil that we use in animal feed. and we produce fertilizers that we use in agriculture. So as I mentioned, we are using the waste from palm oil industry. And this is a waste that really no one else can use. Other animals can't eat it. Palm oil mills don't know what to do with it. It is one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in Southeast Asia. And we are the only solutions for these palm oil mills to upcycle this waste. We eliminate the methane and greenhouse gas emissions that would otherwise be released. And therefore our products are actually carbon negative, which we, as kind of impact-driven founders and as an impact-driven team, is something we're super excited about, obviously. The insect protein space, you might be familiar with it. There is already quite some activity in the space. Most of it has been in Europe. Almost $1 billion has been raised in some insect protein companies in Europe alone. But we believe that we can do it very differently, being in Asia and using different technology. We're using very modular technology that allows us to scale much quicker and more nimbler at a lower CapEx and OpEx cost. We use a very differentiated sales strategy that allows us to sell directly to farmers, which has really boosted our sales. And just being in Asia has a lot of advantages for us. 92% of aquaculture production by volume is here in Asia. And so we're really in the middle of the aquaculture market. We have access to cheap and scalable waste to use as a feedstock. So there are a lot of benefits. As of today, we're running Singapore's largest insect protein plant. And by next year, we're going to be setting up a large-scale plant in Malaysia. We have so far raised money around $1.5 million from different investors, such as the Asian Development Bank and other investors. We have a very great team here in Singapore. 50% has insect protein experience already, which is a very hard skill set to have, and everyone's really excited about what we do. And yeah, just excited to be on the panel and looking forward to the discussion we have this hour.
Thank you, Tim. As you can see from all the panelists, they're not only tackling one problem, right? So usually, if you think about sustainability, think about circularity, you can actually try to solve multiple challenges at the same time. Before we go back to the two panelists, which try to disrupt the fish industry in multiple different ways, we're gonna start this part of the moderated question with Tech Camellia. And I do see a lot of questions coming in. We have over 220 participants in the call, and we already have quite a few questions coming in, and please keep them coming. If you're curious about how did they start a business, how did they develop, and what is going on, and we'll in about 10 minutes time turn to your question. Jagannathan, let's start a conversation around technology, because that's the theme for today a little bit. I have been studying and also teaching, consulting around the technology space for the last 10 years and see the development of AI and many other technologies. One of the big challenge, or one of the big assumption people have around technologies like AI and IoT, it is require a huge upfront investment. It requires expertise in data analytics. It requires a whole set of historical data that has to be clean and relevant. And therefore, companies have this mental block of how do we actually make it happen? What I find really interesting for what you do is you are able to take this sort of up in the air, if you will, this highbrow technology, but really turn it affordable for the farmers, for the community. So very curious if you can explain a little bit, how do you do it? How do you reduce the cost of technology in order to make it more accessible?
Yeah, great question. So let me break it up. As I explained, when we started this up, Chengyi, we were already looking at farmers in India, Asia, Africa, and then of course the rest of the world. So on top of that, you do have this value for money for a lot of these farmers, because let's be honest, some of them are right on the substance side, whereas there are some bigger businesses as well. So how do you demystify it? Part of it is actually the sensor mix. I want to just briefly touch up on the sensor mix. So we use a lot of ground-based sensors. What we realized though is the upfront investment is huge. So what founders can do is there's been an explosion in sensors, but also which are space-based, like satellites, for example. And to have the sensor mix really sorted out. For example, for which customer segment, and then based on the application. So it's a little bit for horses for courses, and getting the sensor mix is actually really important, which helped us scale up quite a lot. So for example, there are more than 2,000 satellites. Actually, the number keeps growing up there, most of them in communications domain, and you have to play the supply chain. And I feel that's one of our competitive advantages. When it comes to ground sensors as well, let me give you an example. There's a key metric called tubal pressure of a leaf. It's a bit like hemoglobin for humans. If you measure that, you get to know everything. And that's what I think tubal pressure is the hemoglobin for plants and soils. Now, so you have to know the maximum readings you can get out of, let's say, very optimally placed sensors. And some of these are expensive. So sensor mix is important. What I would just like to highlight as well is cloud system. Now, you mentioned you don't have to have a very fancy team developing a tech stack. And this is just the last 1 or 2 years. So Google and Amazon did excellent in storage, but guess what? They're also now providing just analytics. And you can buy it, why not? In fact, they give you a lot of startup credits. And this is entering the space. So the big cloud providers are also providing excellent analytic solutions, which you can bunch up. And then what do? We are there on the ground and we understand the problem and solve it for them. So yeah, Chengyi, these were 2 of the examples, but I'm happy to come and, let's say, demystify some of the other things. We are also learning every day. It's about the business model as well. So happy to speak about
just
that.
one very quickly comment on that before we go into the business model, which is also very interesting. There is this notion of AI being something that is fancy and hard to approach. But what we basically say, it comes down to data and algorithm, and then the insight you want to drive. And actually, when you work with communities like farmers, they have a lot of insights, and especially the local knowledge matters a lot in this domain. And therefore, how do you partner with them to get inside out is already half the problem solved. Data, I fully agree. I wrote an article with Cargill as well around how do they solve their water shortage challenge globally. Leveraging existing data, public domain data, and the data that's available through satellite and many others is something that people often neglect, but they are hugely important for model and give you a jump up. And the third part is, as you said, the storage, IoT, and algorithm. You don't have to develop the unique ones, and there's plenty out there that you can borrow. There's also the open system development for AI algorithm that you can leverage in order to reduce your cost. And it's also being smart on what you push. And we increasingly see this hybrid model between hardware, as you said, sensors, and the software play, that you can actually reduce the cost and benefit the local community. So now let's talk a little bit about the business model, right? So you probably have to invest quite a bit in order to build a database for local and through the sensors, etc. And then how do you make that palatable for the local communities, and what business model are you using, subscription or advertisement, etc. And how do we think about this, and how do you tap this into the social well-being of the community?
Yeah, I mean, another great question. What we were lucky with is we had excellent accounts. And I feel the single part of the business model is we didn't use a push strategy. So we did not use a push strategy at all. Now we are subscription based, and we can also speak of profit margins, but almost for the first 12 to 18 months, we would work a lot of accounts, just land up in the farm and say, try this for 3 months, okay, see if it works and come back to us. And who's going to say no to that? So that's a little bit of the push strategy. There's also a lot of benefits there, because as you said, the classifiers is not the key part of the AI. This is what we realized as well. We use certain algorithms from the cloud, Australia, US. Guess what? They wouldn't work with the local seed varieties, right? And plenty of other things. So the benefit with that was we could also get a lot of local data from them. So we became a very data-rich process. We used this push strategy, and that was the initial business model of uptake. And now we are looking at both subscription and advertising-based models. We have a SaaS platform, but this is after we went through that process of the initial, the pilot, so-called.
Right. So I think that the very interesting thing is really how do you communicate the value through your initial adoption stage, and also how do you continue to experiment around business model, right? So there's a lot of exciting things around digital business model, but none is set in stone and say this is the holy grail. You basically have to try different way to think about it. There's a question from the chat. I'll bring it up. When we talk about the technology for the future, are we only talking about AI and others? So that's a perfect transition. Now we're going to go to the fish people, and no, we're not only talking about AI and data, but we started to think about different ways, different new technology to move. We're gonna move to Avant Meat first. And basically thinking, so I was a biologist. For those who didn't know, for 7 years, I was in the lab and doing cell culture. So this sounds really exciting and relevant to me. But if my knowledge still holds, you can make a lot of the proteins in the lab, right? As Carrie, as you mentioned, but they tend to be expensive. The cell culture medium, the petri dishes, and even the incubator themselves. So your production at the very beginning also has a high cost in terms of the meat production, but eventually within a very short period of time you were able to reduce the cost to be palatable or comparable to the market. And how do you actually think about that evolution of the technology, and how do you sort of engage with the team to really move that forward in order to reduce the cost to be comparable in the market?
Right. Yeah. So indeed, you know, the cost reduction is one of the challenge of the industry. So again, like going back to why it is so expensive to begin with, to give a very brief context. So the the technology or the scientific principle was discovered more than 50, 60 years ago. We find that cells, animal cells, that like cells from our body, they can actually exist outside of animal bodies, given the right kind of environment and right kind of nutrient. And so they can actually continue to do the job, which is the cellular function, which is one cell split to two split to four split to 8, and then you can have, you know, kind of exponential numbers of cells. And imagine it now, it is actually some muscle cells or fat cell that you can finally make it into your food product. So that's the fundamental of that. But then, you know, the cost, why so expensive? For the cells, we do need to provide them with the nutrient in liquid form, obviously, because the cells do not have teeth to digest, right? So all of the nutrient like glucose, amino acid, vitamins, and, you know, etc., in liquid form. And one of the most important cost driver is called the fetal bovine serum. Interestingly, you know, the cell actually needs some complex protein kind of material to give it the cellular signal to continue to conduct the work. And however, when it is outside of animal bodies, we do need to supplement that using, you know, other way. This is the so the FBS in the short term is the major cost driver, as well as all of the other related kind of reagent and chemical that when we start the R&D, everything coming from the pharmaceutical world and medical world, and it is very expensive. And per kilogram of the raw kind of we call biomass, it can be over $2,000, $3,000 or depending on the kind of cell line, it can be even close to $10,000 per kilogram. So now the first step is to remove the major cost driver, which I just mentioned, the fetal bovine serum, which is the serum extracted from young calf, from the blood of young calf. So we need to remove that because 3 reasons. 1, it is too expensive. 2, is actually a potential kind of route of contamination, like think about the mad cow disease back in, you know, about a decade ago. And then the 3rd is that it is not sustainable because all of what we do is try to remove animal from the equation of producing meat and animal protein. So we do not want to rely on animal source material. So because of these three reasons, companies, basically all of us in this space, first job is to remove the FBS. So we have actually done that in 2020. We started in 2018, but then 2020, we already removed fetal bovine serum from we call that the nutrient-feeded cell, which is called cell culture medium. And however, very quickly, or even before that, we already see that it is not sufficient to reach price parity. If you look at the price of, let's say, 2,000 to begin with, if I reduce 90% of the cost, it is still 200 or like around 100. So compared to meat, wholesale price, chicken, it could be $1, $2 US dollar per kilogram, pork maybe a few dollars, and beef more expensive, 10, 20-ish, and fish is a range of like a few dollars to 20, 30 US dollar per kilogram. So it's still a very long kind of last mile of cost reduction. So what we actually develop in strategy of IP and innovation is that we focus on the cost reduction side. We look at all of the steps we need to produce the product, like how do we make the cell line more productive? Is there alternative way to actually supplement the the expensive FBS? And then how do we actually improve the bioprocesses and also the machine in that? So systematically and rationally lay out a path that we can have a clear way to do the cost reduction. All in all, in this space, there are various kind of projection and study conducted by different peoples. We are talking about reaching price parity around 2020, depending on the meat type. So maybe chicken and pork, it would take a little bit longer. For some of the more expensive kind of meat product, we will reach that earlier. In our case, we have a couple of products. Some of the product actually more premium product. So for example, one of the ingredient that is very much liked in Asia, which is called the fish maw, the swim bladder fish. For that product, we kind of technically already at price parity. But for other like market product, we are still working on the cost reduction. So this is how we are addressing the cost reduction as well as the go-to-market as well.
Great. Americ, hopefully that started to answer your question. And we also had Omar ask the question around the technology, and Carrie, you kindly explained, and Benjamin and Mingyi started to ask about the price parity of alternative meat, and Mafalda as well. But these questions also goes to another and is the consumer adoption. You started to talk about your go-to-market, so maybe just a few words around that. There will be meat loyalties and basically keen for the textures, and then there are questions in the market on how broadly this can be sort of brought into the market. For example, me asked beyond Singapore and potentially Qatar, what are some of the other areas that this can be available or sort of palatable to the public? So can you comment a little bit, how do you shift the consumer adoption? We know the veggie-based meat alternative has gone sort of through that process, but they stalled a little bit. So what's the future for the cultured meat?
Right. For the consumer side, there are like 2 points I would like to mention. One is that indeed the consumer kind of marketing messages would be very different for the Asian market versus Europe and American market. According to some research, indeed, as a consumer ourselves, our priority in making certain purchase decision standing inside a supermarket motivated very differently across this region. Asian consumers tend to be, of course, price and taste is general, that's taken for across the board. But then, food safety, for example, because there have been quite a lot of, food scandal in some part of Asia, including multiple kind of those horrible stories in China, etc. So I think food security, in particular for seafood, okay, where is my fish coming from? Have they been swimming in, polluted water? Am I actually eating microplastic? I think that will drive. Also, when we do our product and messaging, we want to offer an additional layer in addition to sustainability. Whereas consumers in Europe and in America, more or less, they actually put sustainability, whether my purchase choice affect the environment, actually rank a little bit higher. So it's a little bit kind of like market by market situation. The other second point I would like to raise is that the technology space only existed less than 10 years. So the first startup actually existed from 2014, 2015. So it's not more than 10 years. And so we are still at the pretty much at the beginning of the technology journey. So the first kind of product in the market will be very much limited by the available machines and method. So you know, you can imagine the material produced out of the bioreactor will be more like a minced meat. So it will not have a certain form. So the first generation of product will be hybrid. Hybrid means that we have the animal protein, animal cells, animal protein kind of flavor mixed with some plant-based material so that we can give it form and shape. We can easily cope with that. I always like refer that similar analogy with the mobile phone kind of like story, right? The first mobile phone is like a big bottle, so expensive. And, you know, the only thing you did with that is that from that time on, you can call someone without a cable connected to the wall. And so here we have similarly achieving the first step is that we can now remove animal from the equation of making animal protein and meat. The first kind of generation product is not perfect, and the technology still another like decades of time to get to more sophisticated like structure product, like snowflake kind of a GUI, that kind of thing. There are a lot of like method out there like bioprinting and tissue engineering, stuff like that, but all of them need a bit more time to develop. These are my 2 points for consumer expectation and, you know, how do we see that going to market and messaging.
Yeah, be patient, but keep pushing. And we do see a lot of development of technologies that we didn't believe it's going to take off, but eventually we all get very much used to it. Wonderful. Tim, thank you for your patience. Let's come to your side. And we do know if you count the animal species, insects is one of the largest on the planet, and they do contribute a lot to the protein production. So probably talk a little bit through what I really like is you're tackling around both ends. So when we're thinking about carbon neutral, your products are carbon negative. In a lot of ways, it takes in the waste and turn it into treasure. A lot of what we're teaching here is around the circular economy. So for nature system to be regenerative, you have to really think about this circularity. So talk to us a little bit about how do you achieve carbon negative and how do you actually scale and try to change how the industry is configured from the linear one to a circular one.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think one of the things that we like so much about the business, right, is that, as you mentioned, we're taking this horrible, smelly waste product in, and we're getting these beautiful products out: protein, oil, and fertilizer. So that's something that really excites us. And then the waste that we're putting in is from palm oil. If you go to a palm oil mill, you will see these ponds that are basically, there's bubbles coming up and there's emissions coming out of it. And these guys have no clue what to do with it. And so we try to develop technology around it on how to take that and basically have our insects eat it, which we've been working on so much. And there's a lot of studies done on the impact, the environmental impact of the waste that we're using, because it's everywhere. And the fact that our insects can eat it before it emits waste is basically the main source of the carbon reductions of our process. And that also makes our insect protein carbon negative. And in terms of scalability, right, within our business, we're all about scalability. If we don't reach scale, we're out of business, because we're selling into the animal feed industry. We need such huge volumes to even get to the table of some of these customers that we're talking to. So our engineering, our technology is all developed around reaching scale, working with large partners, in this case from the palm oil industry, to take their waste products and upcycle it, eradicate all these emissions that are coming out of it, and use it to produce all these good products. And our vision is to really have our sites next to each and every palm oil mill, each and every 2,000 palm oil mills across Malaysia and Indonesia, to really take care of this problem and produce a lot of very carbon negative protein.
What's their attitude for adoption? Are they excited because of the additional revenue stream and waste treatment, or are they resistant because of the capital investment, or it's in a different industry, and how do you solve those?
Yeah, so I think, and that is, I think in the context here in Asia, we're seeing that people like adopting new technology as long as it's there's a benefit to them, right? And sustainability just to make clear, it's not a benefit to a company, and for most companies we're working with. So whenever we talk to our shrimp farmers that we're selling to, as long as the price is right and the performance is right, especially, that's when they want to adopt it. They don't really care about the sustainability. In terms of the palm oil companies that we take the waste from, right now, we're taking a problem away from them. They have a headache handling all this waste. It takes a lot of their space. They got some flag about it because of the environmental concerns. So we're removing a pretty big headache from them, and that's why they like to work with us, and that's why we can take their waste from them.
Right. Let me take some of the questions from the participant. We already answered quite a few, and I'll pose this question to you, but open up to the to Jagannathan and Carrie as well. When you think about large incumbent, right? So in our poll, everyone's saying those should be the ones who take responsibility. Are they your friends? Are they your foe? Are you collaborating with them, partnering, or are they trying to disrupt what they do? And how do you partner in a way to move the field collectively?
Yeah, maybe I can take the question first, right? So for us to scale, we definitely do need a partner with larger companies. We can't do this alone. If we want to become the biggest player in the world, we need to have access to waste, and access is now controlled by these large companies. If we want to sell into huge volumes, we have to work with the large animal feed companies of the world, the large agricultural companies of the world. So for us, we are actively partnering with several of these larger companies. But as a smaller startup, the question is always how to do this in a way that, as a small company, you don't get crushed by the larger company, right? For example, when you raise a round of money, do we want to have a large corporate on our cap table? It's a very sensitive question. There are pros to it because you can grow much bigger. At the other hand, other companies might not want to work with you, so you're limiting their market. So it's a very fine balance that we have to take in partnering with these larger companies.
Carrie, are the food product producers your friends or foe?
Yeah, I think, I echo with Tim. What we do in our case is actually coming up with a solution or technology to produce fish product. For example, the fish product we make do not have bone risk. It does not have head and tail, so it's a lot of like streamlining operation and processing. So this is a solution. We're more like a technology service provider rather than, I think when we talk about big company, a lot of the time they're more like B2C branding. So in a certain way, we actually work with them, actually target to work with them. But when they are a strategic partner or investor, of course, one of the challenges that, okay, they know all of the details and the pricing and everything. So that may have some challenge on another level. But in generally, we believe that, working with, big corporation is one way to accelerate going to market.
Jagannathan, anything to add? You already talked about Amazon and Microsoft being sort of a great partner.
No, this is an open question. We work with some of the commodity traders, as I told you, in cocoa, coffee. So it can help you scale up, but because remember in AI, one key thing is data. I said data and you get that. But one very interesting question is, if you have to disrupt the food systems, are the present incumbents going to be part of the future solution? And, chemicals and water, these are two things, the way it's used in agriculture, you have to ask if the big incumbents there, and especially if you're looking to disrupt the way farming is done, are they, what's the future mix going to look like? Yeah.
Interesting. Cool. So that's why we're calling for the reimagination in a lot of ways. Let's bring in some other players. Bruce and Eugene raised the question around government. So what's the government role in all of these? In our polls, we focus on the private sector, but what's the public sector role, and how should policy guide some of these conversations, like a carbon tax? Olivia also asked, a lot of what you do requires a funding, right? So what's the VC role in getting you started and really sort of jumpstart the industry? So anyone wants to comment on those, the players?
Yeah, maybe I take the last one on the founding and VCs. I must say that in the last 2 to 3 years, and agri-tech, especially where we are in, used to be this niche sector, compared to education, but venture capital, especially early stage venture capital, have really come onto this. As we said, if we were lucky even at the seed stage to have loyal VC back us, I would say absolutely there are plenty of benefits of partnering with them. As I was telling, even the connects with some of these corporates, various mentoring, etc. So that's been a very good story. Yeah. And just quickly on government, I would just say that plenty to do. As I said, if as a startup you need to get credits, there's no unified market. I think if they are going to make it dollar-based, our whole problem is the daily output of a French farmer is equivalent to a monthly output of an Indian farmer. But it's both lives over there, and the dollar-based market to price out carbon even, or some of the cleaner systems. I think that governments need to step in, make it a more level playing field. Yeah.
Tim and Carrie. Tim, you're on mute.
Yeah, maybe quickly on the VC role, right? I think typical VC, and we're seeing that switch as well, would not want to invest in startups that have a lot of capex, require a lot of capex to scale, right? And it also goes back to the question, in terms of what does it mean tech in food tech? In my opinion, you need a blend of software solutions, but definitely if you want to build sustainable food systems, you need to actually build stuff, right? You can just sit on the computer and like produce some food. So for us, we definitely do need some capex to increase, although we try to limit it. And we need to have VCs or financiers that are comfortable with that, because the multiples can still be made and ROI can still be made for these VCs, but they have to be understanding that this is not your typical SaaS business to invest in. Maybe on the government role, I think it's really important. I'm sure Carrie will echo that here in Singapore, there's a lot of support in terms of regulatory changes. I think in terms of cell-based meat is one of the best in the world, and in terms of insect proteins and insect ingredients. Actually 2 weeks ago, to implement new regulations, and it really helps us as new startups. And maybe also I would like to add in the poll itself, I voted actually for consumers that they really need to put up a better effort, because at the end it's a consumer. That's where it starts, right? The consumer directs the government. The consumers also, they are also key and most important for corporates. And we're seeing that, for example, in Europe, it's much easier to make to price our products at a premium. So a lot of European startups, they can sell and do much better in Europe. But here we need to really fight and have prove our product performance benefits rather than sustainability benefits to do better in the Asian market. So it would be great for us if that switch can be made as well. And I believe it really starts with the consumer, and then everything else will change as a consequence.
Right. So we're on top of the hour. So let me ask the final question before I ask you to close. There are quite a few questions in there from the students and some anonymous asking. So what can you very quickly talk about what's the INSEAD impact around your sort of company or startup and your own career, and how can students participate in some of these social impact actions? Carrie, you wanna get started?
Yeah, sure. I'm MBA December 2008. And before that, my previous professional, actually as an architect. So as an architect, I did not know that much about finance and everything. So I thought that I should, but I have been actually thinking about some interesting idea related to the property market, etc. like that. But I did not have the confidence to actually take the first step to actually start a business, because I don't feel, I have all of the knowledge to do that. So I think INSEAD, give me a lot of confidence. And but however, it took me about 10 years after I graduated and working in the property kind of sector for about 10 years before I come across this. Actually coming from my own personal journey, I have turned someone that do not eat meat for about 6-7 years. And then I realized there's a lot of things that I can do in this area. So I kind of switched from my profession to this business. But definitely, INSEAD has been giving me a lot of these, the network, as well as a lot of these, support in my mind as like confidence to starting something on my own. Yeah.
Very briefly, Tim.
Yeah, so we actually started our idea at the bootcamp as a 19J. Then we did the INSEAD venture competition, which we won, and we got some prize money. So we got a lot of momentum at INSEAD, and I was more focused on setting up my business than the classes often. And after I actually first joined another insect protein company and then started this independently. But it really all started with at INSEAD. My co-founder is from INSEAD. A lot of our investors are INSEAD related initially in the seed round. We have some professors. We also have Loyal. I think you mentioned that as well. So it has helped us a lot. And it has been a real INSEAD journey, which you can probably even see from our name of the company, right? Which is kind of, in the beginning, it was a student project, and now it's actually a full-fledged company.
Great, Jagannathan.
Yeah, I think they covered it all. It's for me personally, INSEAD was really at the core of this journey. Although I worked in corporate even after my MBA in 2014, but all the same reasons. Just one final one, this focus on general management principles, the sound business model, it's about corporate finance, audit, org structure, marketing mix, and coming it together with the distribution channels. So I would say that grounding, which the general management, which is stressed for in the MBA, it's really helped us in our scaling up.
Very good. We're already 4 minutes past, and thank you for those. So we still have close to 150 people with us. So this has really been fascinating. Without me closing this, let me give one sentence or two sentences to each of you. When we think about tech, when we think about the future of food, where do you think the future is going? And what should we do, and how do we participate to make this planet a better place? Let's this time start with Tim.
So first of all, I think the food space is maybe the most important space in the world, and there's a current food crisis, right? So today, inflation is caused by an increase of food prices. So it's causing the recession that we're getting into today. So it's a huge problem today, and it will just get worse. So I think it's time to really focus on alternative proteins and different ways to design our food systems.
Great, Jagannathan.
Ag tech is cool, but think like a farmer does, less as a programmer. And the second thing, just if there are founders out there in general, it's not about you, the company you find. I mean, it's not about you, it's about the vision you have and who the people or the community you're serving. So yeah, those would be my closing thoughts on today. Thank you.
Thank you. Carrie, last word.
Yeah, I agree with the Paul and what Tim also said. Consumer, which is ourselves, can actually change a lot. In particular, for example, alternative meat. If we know that our way of producing animal using the traditional method is not sustainable, it creates a lot of problem, pollution for the environment, actually greenhouse gas, etc. We have, however, if we can actually not eat meat to begin with, then we probably do not need to have even cultivated meat to a certain extent, right? If everyone is just turning, eating plants, and that will be so much, sustainable and so much greener, but it is not. So I think coming back to that, I think consumer like ourselves, we probably should start asking ourselves every time we make our purchase decision, do we order too much for the food? Am I wasting it? Do I make the most, sustainable choice, etc. So I think, yeah, this is my last word to offer to everyone.
Thank you very much. We started with technology. We come back to how do we rethink and reimagine the ecosystem. Thank you, the three founders. Really impactful work you are doing, and hopefully we'll see a different future in 30 years when we ask you to come back and talk about your achievement. And thank you everyone for participating and your questions. Please tell us, what do you think about the session and what more do you want us to talk about? And this is from TED Talk X from INSEAD, and thank you all very much.